Rosena, Allin-Khan, your mum's Polish, your dad's Pakistani. How did that affect growing up?
Gosh, I think we were the rather funny-looking family, as described by everybody, especially in the 80s, when no one had really seen mixed families. My mum is super blonde, and my dad, obviously, Pakistani. And so people would stare at us quite a lot. And I think people were quite unfiltered in a way that they're more careful about these days. So people used to ask my mum, when my brother and I were with her, where we adopted, where did she get us from? We endured quite a lot of racism as well, actually. My mum found it. She wasn't that welcome by her community, I think, for being one of the first people to marry outside the community. And she received a lot of racism generally. I think it's really interesting because it was one thing experiencing racism when we were with my dad, but actually seeing the racism and vitriol towards my mum was quite a unique thing. People were quite angry at her very publicly for clearly having kids that were mixed, and the things they used to say to her were quite horrible. But growing up in Tooting, which is a really wonderfully diverse community, there were obviously quite a few Polish people, quite a few Pakistani people, but there weren't many mixed families. And so I think I always felt like I belonged in my community and was welcome in my community, but didn't really often feel like that, like further afield. And yeah, it's interesting looking back now. I think very early on I was aware that society wanted to put me in a box. I found that identity was something that was easy for other people to work out rather than for me. So they would be like, well, she's a half Catholic, half Muslim girl, or she's a mixed race or a half caste, or it's almost like people wanted a label. And so I think you sort of grow up wondering a little bit about who you are from a very young age. And I think it took a while to work out, yeah, I'm Rosena and I'm Polish and I'm Pakistani and I'm proudly British. And you can be embraced for all that you are without having to pick a side. And I think it was so interesting because people would like to say, well, you're not full Polish, are you? Or be very surprised if you speak Polish, or be like, well, you're not full Asian, are you? Well, I was like, well, my heritage and ancestry isn't any less just because one of my parents is from there instead of two.
How many languages do you speak?
Well, it depends if we're like ordering a kebab type language or whether it's sort of fluent. I mean, my Polish is pretty good. I speak random bits of French because I did that at school. My Urdu is noteworthy for ordering kebabs and curries. And I like to think I can speak English. So bits and pieces. But, you know, I feel really lucky. And I think it makes me who I am, that I have this sort of rich tapestry of heritage. I think I can literally blend in anywhere, particularly being from South London and it already being really diverse, having Polish, Pakistani heritage, but really owning how British I am. And that can mean being many things in your heritage, but you're still proudly British.
Your mum and dad split up.
Yeah.
How old were you?
Well, it was complex. I was quite young. It was a challenging childhood to say, but you know, it's all it shaped a lot of who I am now, I think, and the things that I fight for. But no, my mum did a fantastic job of raising my brother and I by herself, and she's amazing actually. But it was not easy as a Polish woman, a Polish immigrant. All her family were and still are in Poland, raising two mixed race kids under Thatcher in South London with not a lot of money.
Were you poor?
Yeah, I'd say that we were poor in material terms, but rich with feeling loved by my mum, I think. And I think when you haven't got any extended family, the core around you are what really matters. And I think my mum had to sort of love us enough for a mum and a dad and aunts and uncles and grandparents.
But you had a relationship with your dad who sadly you lost this year, didn't you?
Yeah, my dad and the journey with my dad, I think, has taught me the power of forgiveness. I'd say that much. And I had a relationship with him, especially towards the end, and it was a very one of the most painful things I think I've been through ever has been losing him this year, because obviously came on the back of helping so many other families as a doctor through COVID, and then not being able to see him properly in his care home because he had dementia, and standing on the side of the street with my little girls waving and dancing to Pharrell Williams Happy to try and make him feel loved so that he'd still eat and things like that. And then he went into hospital and was unwell for a few months, and then made it out and then passed away. We were able to be with him in April, but I'm grateful that I was able to be there, because I spent the pandemic supporting families who couldn't be with their loved ones in hospital, and the fact that I could be there was really important. And in the end, you know, I was mourning his loss now, mourning a lot of things from the past. So the grieving process for me was pretty acute, I'll be honest. I'm still not over it.
Are you grieving now?
Yeah, very much so.
I haven't lost my parents. There'll be some who have, some people who are watching who haven't. Do you have any advice, things that are working for you to deal with a loss of a parent?
I'd say that love isn't linear, that every emotion you feel is legitimate, whether you feel sadness for what you may or may not have shared in your life with someone, whether you feel a loss of time lost, and in my case, you know, all was well by the end. You know, I'd made my peace with a lot of things while my dad was alive, which made the journey at the end much easier. But I'd say when it comes to grief, there's no manual, Gloria, there really isn't. And everyone deals with it in different ways. And there is no right way to deal with it. Some people feel things very acutely right at the beginning and can't stop crying, can't get out of bed, you know, drink a lot, exercise excessively. There is no right or wrong way to grieve. So I would say that for anyone watching this, just go easy on yourself. It is not a quick process. There can be guilt for some people surrounding the fact that some people think they need to feel sadder than they do, but sometimes the sadness can come later. There are some people who feel guilt because they feel absolutely crippled and can't get out of bed and they've got a family to look after.
Do you feel any guilt?
No, I don't actually. I feel no guilt at all. I feel blessed that I had a relationship with my dad in the end, albeit a very unique one because he wasn't able to speak anymore. But he could understand and knew I was there, and I was able to be with him, and that for me brought a lot of solace. But I won't lie, it hit me hard, and I looked for a way to escape the grief. That it was just all encompassing, and I think I had exhaustion as well because I'd gone every day to the hospital for months, and then at the care home, and I didn't leave his side for a week. Didn't shower, didn't leave, didn't anything. I was there with my brother, and when I sort of emerged, I didn't know what to do with myself, and so I thought, well, I have to function. You know, I'm an MP. I have this job. I've got to serve people. I can't serve people from my bed. I just didn't know what to feel. I had 2 young children, and they were sad, and I didn't want them to see me crying, and so I ended up just exercising excessively. I was doing MMA and Muay Thai kickboxing. I mean, I box anyway.
What's MMA?
Mixed martial arts.
Oh.
I was going to the mixed martial arts gym and just really like doing MMA classes, because for an hour-long class, I was so worried about surviving it. Not worried in a bad way, but I just needed something intense to stop thinking. And for everyone, it's different, and there's no judgment. For some people, you know, they use substances, they sleep, whatever it is. For anyone watching this, there's no right or wrong way. It just is.
You mentioned that you worked in A&E. Of course, we've been through a pandemic. You're an A&E doctor. You worked through the pandemic. You must have seen some terrible things. Yeah. I worked in A&E, but I also worked in the intensive care at the Royal London as part of the family support liaison team. I first worked at the Nightingale as part of that team, and then that team moved to the Royal London because in the second wave, which I think was actually the worst one of all, the numbers of patients it was like out of a bad movie. You couldn't have predicted the sheer numbers, the wards that were just filling up, the intensive care wards just overflowing with patients. And so the family support liaison team was established by a really good friend of mine called Gareth and another guy called Frank, and they invited me to come and be part of it. And what that meant was liaising with all the families that couldn't be there. And so there were families who'd waved goodbye to their loved ones on the back of an ambulance, thinking they'd join them at the hospital, but the pandemic meant they couldn't be there. And then their loved one was in intensive care and they didn't know what was happening. So we would call them, fill them in, tell them what was happening, take messages to their bedside. And then we'd also sometimes schedule Zoom calls, or if they were going to pass away, we would try and facilitate a last visit. But for me, it affected me hugely. And there's one call that I'll never, ever forget as long as I live. I think doctors, you have these like specific moments in your mind. And I took the iPad to a lady who was in her late 20s, and she was pregnant, and she'd had to have her baby by emergency cesarean on the intensive care unit, and she was unconscious. Her baby was in the neonatal intensive care unit. And on this call, these 3 little faces popped up, and she had 3 kids at home who were under 6 and their dad. And I'm there in full PPE, like looking like an alien to them, and I'm saying hello to them on the iPad. And I said, I'm just going to turn the iPad so you can see your mummy. And they were having this discussion amongst themselves about how can we help mummy wake up? And then they had this discussion that if they all shouted together, maybe mummy would hear them. And so they just basically in unison just shouted, "Mummy, mummy, wake up. You've been asleep too long, we miss you." And then they said, "Doctor, do you think she can hear us?" And I just said, "Oh, she can't just hear you, she can feel you. She can feel your love coming through the iPad." And they were like, "Do you think she'll wake up soon? Do you think that helped?" And it's like, what are you supposed to say at that time? What are you supposed to do? You've got these 3 hopeful little faces, the same age as your children. And
there was no hope.
And it's just what to say? She was just lying there.
She didn't come back. She was
dying. She was dying, and it was heartbreaking. And that's just one story of.
Gosh, that's so tough.
It's just
can't stop thinking about those 3 kids now.
Yeah, and the 4th child as well.
Let's go back to your childhood, really, because when I was reading about you, I always have this joke, right, that no one got as bad A-levels as me.
Oh, I can trump you there.
You trumped me.
Yeah, I can trump most people with that.
But then you end up going to medical school and being a doctor.
I wanted to be a doctor since when I was 3. I found out that my grandma was blind. My grandma in Pakistan was blind, and so that was it. I wanted to be a doctor to help her see. That was me done. But then you realise as you sort of grow older, particularly in those times, and from my background, you get made to manage your expectations as to what a girl like me could go on and achieve. But luckily I was good at sport, good at music, and good at school, and I got really good sort of GCSE results and all of that, but still was kind of made to manage my expectations, because at that time, really to go and do medicine, you had to come from wealth, and that certainly wasn't us. And but stuff got really, really tough at home, and I didn't go to all of my exams, and they weren't modular at the time. It was like you either show up or you don't, and then you have a couple of papers. And so I ended up going from being like a straight A student at GCSEs without having to think very much to basically failing my A-levels. I didn't go to the exam. So I just remember this weird sense. I remember this sensation of standing at a phone box, the old school phone boxes, calling my mum, going, I'm a complete failure. I just don't know what to do. And so fast forward, me and her, we went everywhere trying to find somewhere to resit my A-levels. I resat my A-levels, got really good grades, and I went round to medical schools sort of saying, look, life got in the way, would you consider me? And they were all like, don't bother, don't call us, we won't call you, basically. So I didn't want to give up. Like, this was what I was going to do. I was determined to do it. And I went and did a degree that I had no interest in because it had the word medical in it. So I went to study medical biochemistry and then got my degree. And then someone said, why don't you apply to Cambridge? I said, are you having a laugh? I don't know what you've smoked, but Cambridge would never look at a girl like me. Are you nuts? Never thought I'd get in a million years. And I got in. And so the girl that failed her A-levels, age 24, went to Cambridge to study medicine. And it just, I think the story and that really for me was just not giving up and not accepting the titles that other people put on me.
Right, there's a bit of a wild turn here because I had this memory and I couldn't find it on Wikipedia or anything of the things that I was looking at, but I just had this memory. I'm sure Rosena was like a singer in a band.
Oh,
I'm sure someone told me that.
Yeah. It was almost my sliding door moment, Gloria. So at the same time that I was getting into medical school, so I'd always been really musical, and my mum had been a famous singer in Poland, and I've always sang, and I've been in all sorts of bands, and I was offered a record contract, and I had to choose between that and going to medical school. So I chose to go to medical school because it'd always been my dream, but I carried on singing. I fronted loads of bands, and yeah, I love it. I think it makes talking in the chamber much easier when you're used to facing a crowd of people and giving it some large.
All right, very, very final question. Just let's see if we can get a yes or no. Oh, gosh. Do you want to be Labour leader?
No. I literally thought, you're going to not know where I'm going with that one.
You thought about it.
Yeah.
But we might get Rosena.
No, I just don't want to be in opposition for forever. If we don't win the next election, it means I'm spending the best years of my life in opposition again. I will have to leave and join a band, Gloria. No, I will. So for me, the thought of even going there is not an option because I want us to win the next election. Genuinely, I'm not just saying it as a politician's answer. I genuinely want to win the next election because if we don't, that's a decade of me sitting on the opposition benches, and
I've done it.
It's what I mean. So, and if we win, which is what I want, there's no room to think about being Labour leader.
Or a pop star, maybe.
Now that we can talk about.
Rosena Allin-Khan, highs and lows, but a genuine pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute honour to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.